Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. What if the real test of your organization wasn't how high you can climb, but how honestly you can name the mountain you're actually standing on? In today's episode, I'm speaking with James Webster, Amazon veteran turned founder of Sheep CRM, about a deceptively simple idea that's transformed how organizations understand operational maturity. We explore his 3 mountains model, the valleys no one warns you about, and why the toughest part of progress isn't the summit, it's the descent before the next ascent. If you ever wondered where you really are on your path, this conversation will give you clarity. I'm your host, Adam Horner, coach to CTOs from startups to enterprises and everything in between, helping you lead with clarity, confidence, and strategic impact. If you feel like you're figuring it out the hard way, you aren't alone. That's why I created the CTO Playbook, a podcast and platform built for tech leaders just like you. Explore coaching, cohorts, and how you can stay up to date at thectoplaybook.com, helping you build your own playbook for your path at your pace. Let's meet James and get into his playbook. James, welcome to the CTO Playbook. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, not just because of your 3 mountains model, but also because your journey reminds me of some chapters of my own as well. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. It's really nice to be here.
And before we get into your model, let's start with your story. So for those listeners who might not know you yet, because they will do great by the end of this, how do you describe your journey from that little bookstore website to becoming the CTO and founder of Sheep CRM?
Yeah, well, it's been a bit of a journey. So I got a job out of university and that was great. I had a couple of years and then I got a phone call from a guy I knew from university who was working for a startup. They had this idea of selling books on the internet. This is late 90s, showing my age. And I gave it a try. I thought it sounds like a great opportunity. I had fallen in love with the internet. We're in an AI wave at the moment. Back in the 90s, the web was the wave that we wanted to be on. And so this was a fantastic opportunity for me. Indeed. And the parallels with what's going on today are quite interesting, but we won't go into that. The opportunity was amazing. The little bookstore was doing quite well. They were expanding, and so I got to join as the 3rd software developer in the UK. And that little bookstore is still quite big. They're known around the world now, I think in a few places. And if you haven't guessed, I was incredibly lucky to get a job with Amazon in the UK. And yeah, I spent the best part of a decade in my 20s learning what it meant to work in a startup, work with American companies, work at incredible pace. And that was definitely my formative experience and has definitely shaped much of where I've kind of ended up going.
And that hypergrowth is amazing, isn't it? I mean, I had a similar story at Palantir where I did my own little taste of hypergrowth. It's that sort of feeling of the ground shifting underneath your feet while you're still trying to, write the playbook, where in a slow quarter, your job changes every 3 months. And other times, your job was changing pretty much monthly.
Absolutely. And the idea of a playbook or someone to guide you to have had someone to guide you through those stages. But it was just an utterly addictive experience. There's such a sense of purpose of back in the day, we were, was it going to be Barnes and Noble we were fighting against? Was it going to be eBay for auctions? There were so many kind of interesting things where Amazon was fighting for its very existence in those early years. And so the sense of excitement around that was fantastic.
And when you look back on those early years at Amazon, what sort of habits or scars from that environment shaped how you approach operational maturity today?
I think they force you to really question everything. When you're trying to achieve at real pace, you have to be so creative. The traditional approach that I'd been taught at university around how to run a software project just wasn't going to fly. There's no time to do that stuff. But you've got to achieve the outcome. The outcome is everything. So learning to work incrementally, learning to collaborate. And as we will get on to talking about models, learning to find pictures, stories that you can work with partners to figure out what it is you're doing. What is the problem? What is the heart of the problem? What are the obstacles that we're facing? How do you explain to a business owner why the deadlines are going to be challenging when those problems are deep inside your technical architecture? You've got to find ways of and bits of language, models, pictures, stories, whatever you can to communicate. I think fast forwarding onwards in my journey, I think it was learning those experiences of communicating has probably been the thing that shaped me the most. I probably also have plenty of scars from my time at Amazon, but I left sufficiently long ago now that I'm back into the phase of looking back with fond memories rather than the scary nightmares of when those things went wrong.
Yeah, talking about the communication, we often sort of, we don't remember the hard bits as well as we remember the fun bits and the good bits, do we? But at the time, often you sort of the communication of it is, well, it's a bit like, juggling 3 burning skittles while on a unicycle on a bad slope, kind of thing. It's often a tough journey, but at the same time, you figure out a lot of things and then you think, okay, now I've got easier conditions. Wow, it should be easier now. But I don't know if when you jumped from Amazon into smaller organizations, you felt the same thing, or did it feel like a completely different road?
Well, it's fascinating because I thought shifting from working for, a multinational that's trying to achieve these kind of world-changing things, that jumping to smaller organizations would be so much easier. The problems were going to be smaller, the amounts of money were going to be smaller. But it turns out there's a kind of fractal quality to it, which is that whatever problem you immerse yourself in, they're often just as challenging, whether you're trying to save a small company £1,000 or whether you're trying to deliver a whole new product line for a massive e-commerce company. The problems just seem to be the same. And actually, that much of my enjoyment is in solving problems. And I loved working as part of a large company. Maybe one day I will go again, but I think really my heart has been for working in small companies. And part of that is a sense of fairness, a sense of kind of a wider wanting to give access to amazing custom software. Why shouldn't some of the smaller guys have it? I was fortunate enough to be part of a great little team. There were probably 40 of us when I left, working in our little department, and we were just one little microcosm of stuff going on at Amazon. Right. And if we needed to build something, we go build it. We've got an amazing team of talented engineers. And then I was hearing from friends who run charities and small organizations, and their options were significantly limited. And so that's part of the journey I went on, I think, after leaving Amazon, was a desire to kind of go smaller and to make more of a difference in a local setting, but perhaps less of a global splash.
Right, because it's that kind of environment where you don't just build something because you need something, because that would cost way too much. You haven't got the development team, you haven't got the resources. But the challenge sort of shifts from, how do I build it, to how do I put it together from other existing pieces out there as services, products, capabilities that you can use, rather than ones that you just invent from scratch.
Yeah, it felt like we were giving, or the world was giving the smaller guys a pretty tough choice. So jumping forward a couple of steps to where Sheep kind of started, I'd initially intended just to help a charity get set up on Salesforce. I didn't know much about Salesforce at the time. I knew it was a world leader. I thought this would be a great experience for me as a kind of fractional CTO. I can get some experience doing this, help my friends out. But what I found was it just wasn't going to be a good fit. I mean, it's no problem with the software, but the language, the way it was making you work, was just making you compromise for the organization. Again, we're talking 2010 here now, so I'm referencing a Salesforce from an almost different era. But
that was the no software logo back then, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I started that project and I started looking at it, and it just didn't feel like it was going to be a good fit. I knew we could make it work, but I knew it would be a bit like a piece of clothing that kind of is just not quite right, and it would always be a second choice piece. And I had some time, and I thought, great, why don't I? Well, I made a classic foolish mistake of a kind of entrepreneurial software engineer of why don't I just build something myself? And that's how Sheep CRM was born. It was I built a system for this lovely organization who still use it, still very good friends with.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
The CEO, they're Adventure Plus. They work with young people, helping get them outdoors, and they just do amazing stuff. But the story there was just building them a solution, and then somewhere in that process going, I wonder if there's a business model here that could actually work. And it was that kind of light bulb coming on that kind of was the start of that journey.
Wow. So, I mean, there's very much a sort of an ethics and values reason for the shift away from big corporations, but bringing to some extent that, let's just build it approach and going against the grain in that respect. That's amazing.
Yeah, but I suppose looking back, that was probably also a kind of a virus inserted or caught at Amazon, this idea of the audacity to just go do it, to make it happen and to go for it. But so that's probably another reflection on that decade of time spent with them.
But then when you, at that time, looked ahead at what the challenges were going to be in building up Sheep CRM, did you have back then a kind of an idea, a model, a way of looking at A, your own journey that you're going to go on, and B, the journey that your customers would need to go on in order to improve? Because your customers mostly fit into a certain category, didn't they? They weren't just generic companies that needed a technical solution. Tell us a little bit about the actual journey itself and how you thought about it.
Well, I wish I had thought about it a bit more. I wish I had. I would. My earlier self was incredibly naive in setting out on this journey. Almost everything has been retrofitted, in terms of business models and thinking about the clients and the right approach. What I built in that summer of coding was far too generic in a very positive sense. We always, as software people, we try to build as much as possible general purpose tools.
The abstraction.
Which is brilliant, but it's a nightmare when you put your business hat back on because you need focus. So in those early days, it would you're trying to get a bit of traction, and the solution would work for almost anyone who turned up, or within reason. Yeah. And so it took many years really to get the discipline to kind of focus and really start to develop a niche, and then really understand that as a specific market that you can serve, rather than providing more kind of what would have been just generic services of software.
So because Sheep CRM basically handles, if I've understood it right, rather than just sales, which is what Salesforce would give you the suggestion it's more for organizations that have an active membership. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So it's absolutely so we call it a CRM because it's part of that family of products. But nearly all CRMs are about helping people sell stuff. They're about tracking you as a lead through that process. There'll be a funnel, and at the end of it, hopefully you convert. What we've specialized in is membership, where it's less about that kind of perhaps one-time relationship. I'm super keen to know everything about you, but as soon as you're sold, I pass that on to somebody else. Right. Membership is about a much longer-term relationship. And so the data we want to hold about people is often a bit richer, and it's much more about engaging with you and understanding you and facilitating whatever it is that you do as a membership organization. So there'll be some reason why you're a member. And so what we try to do is to help people with their mission to do that.
Awesome. And so when you're helping those people to further that mission, you sort of talked about this journey that they as an organization need to go on from, knowing even who their members are, all the way through to being able to predict, when they're going to reach a certain membership size at some point in the future. So tell us a little bit about that, how you started mapping that out and understanding what that looked like, and then eventually how to speak about it.
So in the early days of the company, I was the coder, the sales guy, you start pulling in a few people to help out, but you end up doing everything. So I still had a lot of time face-to-face with customers. And so you're hearing them in there, giving you their raw needs as to what they want. And obviously what they tell you is a huge reflection on where they are, how they process the problem, how they are thinking about the world. And what regularly used to come out was people who are kind of thinking some way off into the future. They've got some vision of what their organization will be able to do once they sort out their databases. Tends to be that kind of how they approach us. And they've got a number of things that they're thinking about, that when we install a new database, we'll be able to do X or Y or Z. And perhaps the naive person in me should have just said, great, I'll sell it to you, and off we go. But instead, I've always wanted to develop kind of long-term relationships. And actually, and so that's led us to not just really being a software company, it's helping people with that change management, that transformation. And that often involves some awkward conversations, because often people are thinking several steps ahead, and you've got to walk them back. You've got to help them focus on where they are today. Because if you don't have a good understanding of where you are today, then you don't know where you are on the map. Then navigating on from here is always going to be tricky if you don't have a good bearing on where you're at. And so that sets you up for a number of conversations. And what we found is the kind of organizations who've worked well with us are those who are open to that conversation.
Right.
For some, we've almost certainly lost work because people just want you to say yes, and a promise that my software will get you there. But that's not a promise we can kind of make, honestly. So instead, it involves spending a bit of time. And it goes back to this whole idea of telling stories, communicating and being that interface between a commercial or a business, or I use commercial in that term, even if you're a charity, you're still trying to achieve some kind of real world objectives.
Yeah.
And as a CTO, as a technologist, you have to be able to translate and speak their language. If you simply talk about your database and your constraints and your opportunities from a technical point of view, they're just not going to get it.
Yeah. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you're just talking about the benefits and the magic and here's a silver bullet that'll fix all of your things, you're also being just as unuseful, I'd say, in terms of promising what you actually can't deliver.
Absolutely. So the gap in my career that we kind of skipped over a bit was time spent as a kind of virtual CTO or a fractional CTO. I think it's probably a more current use. And that and tempting again as it would be to go in and do the kind of classic consulting thing, turn up, issue the solutions, walk away. And again, perhaps that probably would have made me more money. I'd again prefer to have longer term relationships and actually do that bit, do the consulting bit, but then actually help people walk that walk. So, and actually what that means is you have to live out the advice you gave. You said, we're going to adopt this methodology. Okay, come lead it. Come mentor people and walk that through. And you realize all the things where that's hard. And again, we're into elements of change management and about helping people and about communicating and about story.
And that's, and I think you're absolutely right. What you said earlier on is you got to be honest with yourself about where you are in order to walk the journey from there to somewhere else. Because if you actually start from a different place than you said you're at, you're already off on the wrong point on the map in terms of navigating that.
Yeah. So I love metaphors. I love stories. Maps is one of the, and route finding is a kind of recurring metaphor. And so important to know where you are. We kind of, I hope that with a new generation growing up with GPS, we don't lose the joy of going out with a proper Ordnance and Survey map and a compass and actually navigating. Because actually those skills in the real world are, again, just key. You've got to be able to navigate and understand where you are. And you've got to understand where you're going, and not just in a very vague sense. You've got to be able to articulate where that is. And then there's the route to go. And sometimes the shortest route is not necessarily the best.
Quite often it's not the best one, it's too tempting. So the thing that's amazing about it is that you sort of mentioned about this 3 mountains model that came from something beautifully simple before. And as a metaphor, I love it. So could you tell us about the moment you sort of first realized that this innocent little idea had real power in the world of your digital transformations?
Yeah, well, so walking back a little bit, I was in a kind of, I think the client was already an existing client, and I was preparing a kind of a presentation to go back in and help talk through some of the questions they'd sent through about where they wanted to get to now that they were using our system. And my wife's a primary school teacher, and she was doing one of the regular sessions of kind of evaluating all of her pupils, and she was categorizing them on 3 principles. And so, and it could be numeracy or literacy or something like that. But the 3 were working towards an objective. They're at the expected level, or they're going into a kind of a greater depth. So if you understand that, perhaps in basic numeracy skills, how you can assess a child like that. And what I loved about it was just the beautiful simplicity of that. And I suddenly, it jumped across. And I was like, yeah, that's a really good way of assessing and giving me some language to talk about what my client was struggling with. So I changed it a tiny bit, but I kept kind of the 3-pronged structure to it. And so the first bit became kind of just about managing. And then the second 2 points remained the same. Because what I realized was so many people are just about managing to achieve an objective. So I would separate this about, if you're not yet achieving an objective, then this model, you're kind of pre the model. You're not there yet. But most people are in a kind of existing organization are doing something. So and that's something that just about managing is probably held together with spreadsheets, with bits of paper, with relationships. We just know how each other work. I know to go and ask you for certain things, but it falls apart quite quickly. I'm relying on you, but then you're away unexpectedly. Oh, now the whole system falls apart. So, if Adams from finance isn't there, how do I raise the invoice? I don't know. We're just about managing. And then you've got, so that became the first of the mountains, the peaks that you might be on. And then the second one is where it's working as expected. The example I sometimes use for mountains 1 and 2, the printer sitting behind me. The printer sitting behind me is very definitely mountain 1. We don't do a lot of printing in this house. every time I come to it, it never seems to quite work. But we always kind of get there in the end. But when I worked at Amazon, we had nice, big, kind of very professionally managed laser printers, and they always worked. And if, for example, it was out of paper, there would be a stack of paper underneath, and there'd be a little laminated card telling you, if there's a problem, this is what you do. So it was it was, in this case, a little tiny example of a problem. So in this case, can I print something on, maybe not, depending on the mood of the printer, versus a kind of reliable system. And then the other example I often wheel out is we think about trains. So apologies to listeners who are working in the British Transport Network. I'm sure it's not as bad as the common stereotype is. But we kind of think of the trains in this country as being a little bit unreliable. Perhaps if we need to do a journey with several changes, we'll probably allow quite large buffers in between those because we're not quite sure whether stuff's running on time. And again, completely being stereotypical, we imagine that in Switzerland, the trains are absolutely on time. And so, again, Mountain One would be a train system or a public transport network that's a little bit unreliable. You wouldn't really plan a long journey on it without putting in some very careful planning to understand what happens if this goes wrong. Whereas if you're in an environment where your transport system is super reliable, you might be happy sticking knowing that you can catch two trains with only a few minutes apart because they will just work. And they just work because there's a reputation, but probably because you've already done it.
Yeah.
So
there's an experience factor there to knowing that it works.
Yeah. So we've drifted into printers and trains a long way away from the client at the time who was talking about data systems. So, right. But what we realized was what they were asking for was actually beyond the Swiss train model. They're onto some kind of Mountain 3, which is in my model is kind of always enshrined in mist because you never really get to Mountain 3. But to illustrate it, I'll use actually the example they had. So they were very keen to use to get data warehousing working and to have some really powerful reporting on all of the data that was going into the system. They wanted to bring data from right across their organization, and to get business insights from that.
Got it.
But what I had to do is I had to walk them back and go, well, so to do that, you need to have solid data. So if you start extrapolating forward or asking questions or doing anything on data that's a little bit unreliable, then you're going to get terrible results because you just haven't got there. And so really what I was able to talk about was what you're on Mountain One with your data at the moment. You're able to achieve your objectives, but you're only just about managing. So we need to get you to Mountain 2. We need to get you to the place where your data is reliable. You trust it. And once you trust your data, then we can have a conversation about extrapolating your data forwards and planning on it. If you want to you want to take some data to the board so they can participate in a 5-year planning horizon, you want Mountain 2 data. You want reliable information that you can trust. You don't want to have data that you kind of pull together from 3 or 4 spreadsheets that are slightly contradictory. And then because you do it again next week and you get slightly different answers, that's a kind of a Mountain One style world.
Right. Gaps and missing pieces. Not everything's going to join every time. You don't have every piece every time, at least not reliably.
Yeah. And for many of us, Mountain One is just fine because we are managing. We're getting the job done. But sometimes when people are wanting to really go ahead, we have to kind of wheel them back. And so what I've found, and this is as I say, love metaphors, love stories. Sometimes you make them up and they're disposable. You throw them away after the conversation. Other ones you just keep coming back to because they're kind of useful. And this is one that I've come back to and been using for the last decade or so. And
what was the moment when you sort of realized, oh my goodness me, this is actually something I'm going to keep coming back to? When did you realize, okay, this is a sticker. I'm going to stick with this one?
Probably the 5th, 6th, or 7th time you've got to wield it out and go and get it. Although sometimes I think you can see almost straight away when a story lands because often I've tried them, they don't land, and there's just a kind of glazed look on the face, and so you're constantly kind of playing around with stories until you find a key that unlocks whatever is the meaning that they have. But I think the simplicity of it. I think everyone can picture a mountain, and you can picture that there is effort involved in going up a mountain. So we can talk about that. Actually, there might be you're at different points on Mountain 1 or 2, or maybe you can have a conversation about where do you think you are. So actually, you think you are on Mountain 2. How far up are you? Are you at the top, or are you somewhere in the middle? And so a really good metaphor has got plenty of depth, and you can kind of prod it and
stretch it in multiple ways.
Yeah, and when they start using it back, is a sign that it's landed, and it's kind of making sense to them.
Yeah, I do love that. I had that same experience when I started putting forward a metaphor I've been using recently. In fact, it's one I went through on episode 70. It's the oil rig metaphor, which you and I mentioned in the first conversation we had. And that sort of is one of those ones where you can talk about it in multiple different ways, and it starts other people sort of extending the metaphor and going further with it than you had thought of and applying it to their scenario. And that's, I think that for me is the moment when you know that something's actually sticking and working in a way that's going to become, if not viral, then at least repeated.
Yeah. And one of the areas with the mountains that unexpectedly developed and definitely breaks from the kind of the use of this kind of model in a primary school environment is this idea that, yes, so you have to do the mountains in order. You can't jump from mountain 1 to mountain 3. That was perhaps my initial point, was you had to go. But there was the realization that in all change management, things tend to get worse before they get better. So there's a valley between mountains 1 and 2 where you are trying to bring an improvement, but actually what you're doing is actually making it harder in the short term, because suddenly you were comfortable with your mountain 1 setup. You knew perhaps that your bus and train connection were a bit ropey, but at least you knew how it worked and you'd found a coffee shop to kind of... Now you're suddenly asking me to do this kind of different system. And yes, I can see that I'm going to get there faster, but actually it's a little bit uncomfortable. And again, it's about connecting with people enough that they kind of understand what this journey is going to be like and that they're really up for it. Because some people may well recognize on paper the benefits of some future return, but actually they're not actually up for the journey.
Now, the resistance to change in all of us is surprisingly strong.
So many people expect some form of teleportation between mountain 1 and mountain 3, that we can just zap you across and that you'll just arrive once we install some. And software is often, because software is a bit magical to people who are not familiar with it, it will just deliver some amazing feature. And we cannot kick ourselves in the foot, because sometimes we can deliver magic and we love to do that. But the reality of many decades now of building software is that most of the time there's not much magic. It's mostly hard graft, and it's just plodding and plodding. And that, again, feels a bit like a mountain. If you've walked in the mountains...
more particularly, the valley in between them, you've got to do that trudge down the mountain, undo a bunch of things that you thought were done, and then trudge up the other side, remaking it, putting the effort in to go the hard yards to get up to the next mountain.
And if you've been walking up a mountain, the idea of walking down, you think my legs will love that. But very quickly, if you're walking down a steep, long mountain, your legs will hurt going down as well. So the metaphor has plenty of facets that you can kind of play around with, and it's served well so far.
Yeah, having lived in the Swiss mountains, I can vouch for the going down aches just as much as going up. It's sometimes worse if your knees are really telling you about it too. It has a lot of analogies with another metaphor I use, which is what I call the CTO chasm. This idea that these gaps you have to cross quite repeatedly. And I use mountaineering quite a lot as a basis for the way that I coach, as you probably know. And I think understanding what these organizations have to go through is, it's part empathy, part storytelling, but also then part projection as well. So if mountain 1, then, let's just dig a little bit into it and sort of see how far we can push it, maybe even stretch the analogies a bit. But, in terms of my experience of sort of transformations and going through organizations, number one is they very often have a rose-tinted view of exactly where they are to begin with. And then, like most people, they are in denial of the amount of work it's going to take to get to where they want to be. But in terms of that first step, then, what do you normally use as a way of saying, let's have a reality check and point out that you are actually on mountain 1? Are there ways in which you sort of bring that to life for people?
Well, the very best way is to not tell them that, but to let them make that decision themselves. And so the way I would probably structure it would be to lay out the model and then kind of talk about what... so you can often say, your outcome, let's go back to the one we were talking about. So your outcome of really kind of data-rich decision-making. So we're going to put that as mountain 3. We've got these other 2 mountains. What would you think, what are some of the characteristics of these? And start getting people kind of talking about those. And then get them to self-identify where they are. And often... this is where the slopes of the mountains start to help, because everyone wants to say that they're on mountain 2, because they know they're not on 3, So that's easy. So they're definitely on 1 or 2. And then we can kind of separate out, well, what might that look like? So we might say things like, how consistent are your results? If you brought a new member of staff in, could they follow? Would it just work? Because what we're talking about here is kind of business processes in general. And it can be, again, it can be quite fractal. So we could be talking about almost a company as a process in itself, zoomed right into an individual kind of element within a sub-process of someone's job role that we might be zooming into. So it will depend a little bit on what kind of zoom level we're at and what kind of change. I mean, in my context, we're talking nearly always about databases and about people data. So we're talking about, where is your people data? What do you want to do with it? What kind of questions can you answer? And actually, that's quite a good one, is just how quickly and reliably can you answer a question? So in a membership world, one of the simplest questions you might want to ask is, how many members have I got?
Right. Deceptively simple.
It sounds so simple, and yet surprisingly hard to give a reliable answer. So obviously, if you're running on multiple spreadsheets, you've got to consult each spreadsheet to be able to kind of come back with that answer. But then you might go into more kind of things that are leaving strict technology behind. What's your definition of a member? Do people who don't pay, maybe you offer some kind of free tier, are they members? Or are you really talking about paid members? And then in membership, you often have a grace period, which is what comes at the end of your membership after it should be finished. And if you renew in your grace period, then you don't have to pay the joining fee again. That's quite a common model. So what about that? How do we count those? So you can see that even in something really simple, like how many members have I got, and using a very simple system that people will be familiar with, thinking about kind of gym membership or some other kind of membership, there's depth there in terms of what consistency looks like. So a Mountain 2 answer would be, I can tell you how many there are. I'm going to go to this system and it will tell me exactly what the number is now, and it will reliably do that. Mountain 1 is, I can get you the answer. I've just got to run, I've got to open a few files or a check. I might have to phone somebody in accounts and just see who's actually paid, because sometimes it takes a while for the payments to come through. So I think you can kind of get the idea as to what these worlds are like.
And so I think that's where the first time we're going to use this word maturity comes into it. It's not just about the data, but it's the maturity of the processes that go around it, manage it, maintain it, keep everything up to date. And Absolutely. So I think it's often about the realization. So you're asking better questions of your potential clients there to understand, to help them understand where they're at, Mountain 1 versus Mountain 2.
Yeah.
And do you find that the majority of the time they're actually on, further back on Mountain 1 than they think?
Yeah. People are always more, unless you have a very kind of self-enlightened kind of client, everyone tends to think they're further along than they. Well, I guess we get optimists and pessimists. So I'm perhaps generalizing too much. But yeah, broadly speaking, people kind of think they're further along. And what they're hoping for is that your bit of software will just jump them that last bit. And so it's having these conversations, as I say, is hard work to have, particularly in a sales environment, because what you might be saying, and sometimes this happens, is a client will say no because we're not ready. We're convinced by your model. We need to go away and do some work internally before we come back. And then, we thought software or using a new CRM system was going to solve our problems. We realize actually it's around some internal processing. It's the way we think about these things that we need to sort out first. And that's kind of how I like to do business. I would rather do that. And it's great when those people come back. They are, they're probably committed. They've done the groundwork. You hope they come back.
Because if they do come back, they trust you by that point because they followed your model.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the ideal, is having those kind of open and honest relationships. And sometimes they're not possible, but that's definitely the ideal.
Yeah, so in a really crude sense of looking at it, it's almost like a sales qualification model as well as a business maturity model too.
It could be, yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm no longer part of sales. We've got a great sales lead who will handle all those conversations now. It was actually the part of the role I enjoyed least when I first started the organization. So now I'm more focused on kind of internal transformation, particularly with those clients. And actually, in this current season, what I found myself doing is applying this model internally, so within our own company, and just looking at internal processes. So you realize how many, let's just zoom into my own world of software development, how many parts of the life cycle are really Mountain 1. We are just about managing. We've learned habits. We know how to do stuff. but actually we're a long way short of actually where we could be. And that's kind of, and some of the new tools coming out with Gen AI give us real opportunities, I think, to go after some of these internal tools and pay down technical debt in a way that we haven't done before. So,
and at the same time, though, those tools also, the new capabilities and new tools, every time there's a paradigm shift, it's almost like, well, the Switzerland Mountain 2 kind of moves a little bit further forward and therefore further away from you in a way, because the sort of the standard or the middle mountain is a constantly evolving goalpost.
Absolutely, yeah. This is the hidden twist of the model, really. And again, it would be much simpler if the world were not like this. But what we tend to find, so let me try and come up with a more recent example in terms of software stuff. We might say hunting through log files is a Mountain 1 problem. We know that they're kind of spread around all over the place, but I've never got around to building the tooling to kind of help with that. So, and this is a real world scenario. This is what I did about a month ago. Was just throw some prompts into Claude Code and vibe code away for a couple of hours, and suddenly come back with a nice little unified dashboard that can pull my data in from several different sources and clean it up and give me a nice interface for it. Great. I've gone from Mountain 1 to Mountain 2, but suddenly I'm on Mountain 2 thinking, well, now that I've got this data, I want to go a bit further. So in the context of actually looking at an AI white paper we did for our company, came across the Jennings paradox, which is this guy did some research about the efficiency of steam engines. And steam engines suddenly there was some step change in technology that made the steam engine far more efficient. So he was trying to figure out what did this mean for coal production? And you'd think, well, if we only need half the coal that we had before, we'll the price of coal will go down because we're going to have all this excess coal. It didn't. It shot up because now people did far more with their steam engines. This is exactly what's happening with the Mountain. Is you get to Mountain 2, you now achieve a level of productivity or a win. Nobody ever, well, it seems very rarely, no one ever takes the win. What they see is, great, now I'm standing up here, I can actually see a bit further. There's another mountain I want to get to, and earlier in the model we might have talked about Mountain 3, but so Mountain 3 is always just shifting off. What you've actually done is you've redefined the problem so that you're now just about managing. So your Mountain 2 solution has gone back to a 1 because you're now looking ahead and trying to achieve more with it, and that's probably just the nature of our society that we want to achieve more. We're eager to have a chase down bigger problems and solve ever more.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a quote that was used in one of my startups I worked for. It had something called the Wall of Giants. And when I got there, I was like, well, why is it called the Wall of Giants? And they referenced this quote, if I can see further than others, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And it is a bit like you get to the top of Mountain 2, you can see further and you think, that's just redefined which is Mountain 2 and which is Mountain 3. But I would have thought that in most cases you get to Mountain 2, so therefore as soon as you can see the next thing you need to get to, but by definition is Mountain 3 for the moment.
Yes, indeed. But really what you've done is you redefined the problem and you're now finding yourself just about managing because you suddenly demand so much more. In some cases, yes, you absolutely are able to kind of go, right, in this, because in that specific scenario, in that operational process, you have now achieved kind of an expected reliable result. And if you stop there, then Mountain 3 is just there for the taking. But the reality is that once you realize you can do this, your expectations shift, and so you end up with a kind of a fractal shift again.
And that is the Jevons effect in action, isn't it?
Yeah, we want to keep pushing. We want to go harder.
Cool. So when it comes to sort of, I mean, let's just apply this as a model to Sheep CRM itself, because you've been developing the platform for how many years now?
So we launched 2011, I think. So we are coming up for about 15 years. So it's been a labor of love for a number of years. So for the first few years, I was doing that as a side project, and then around 2016 was when I went all in.
Right, so it's about just under 10 years all in, but about 15 years in total.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story. So then in those first few years, it sounds like that was very much sort of Mountain 1 territory where you're getting by, you're on your own effectively, I assume. But then when you went all in, it was very much a case of, okay, let's get a few things up to Mountain 2. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I wish I had applied the model internally more recently than I have. I think it's always great to be a consultant telling other people how to solve their problems. It takes more reflection to kind of shine that back onto yourself. But yeah, so looking back, I can now see where we're doing that, and these things kind of evolve naturally. My very first invoice that I raised was definitely, and for years probably, that was a kind of mountain one experience. And then you start to kind of polish it up. You write yourself a little process. A very good friend who actually worked with us in those early years, a guy called Ed, who runs Tall Projects. He is a guy who always wants to jump straight to Latin 2. He is, and I don't mean that in the wrong sense. He will do the work to build processes, and that's just the way he thinks and how he's hardwired. Other people are, perhaps more myself, are happy enough to live on a mountain one for a while before I finally drag myself and get the focus to really knuckle down and drop down the valley and then do the hard work going up the other side.
Yeah, I've often found that there's sort of this pattern as to when you decide, okay, now I'm going to take the plunge and sort this thing out, whether it's a process, an approach, a playbook, whatever it might be. For me, it's a rule of three. So once is an accident. You do it once, that's it, done. It's a bit like when you have to print once a month and that's it.
Yep.
2 times is a coincidence. So then you get to the point where you're thinking, okay, I've sort of got something to do from what I did last time, but it's still just really in the realms of, okay, second time. But for me, it's the magic of that third time. Now it's a pattern. Once I see a pattern, then I got something upon which I can go, okay, now I've got a trajectory that takes me or points me towards where mountain 2 is. I can go there. So it's sort of a very simple approach I take of, okay, now I've got to go that march down the valley because I've had the third time. Is that something that you sort of, you're nodding, so clearly it resonates a little. So yeah,
so internally, so speaking very specifically about our own software team, we have what we call sloppy operating procedures. So a slight redefinition of SOP. And the idea there is that, the second time you have to do something, we're not quite as strict as you are, you're far more disciplined, but the second time you have to do some task, then write down as much of a process as you can. And the sloppy bit is it's better to get something down, because if I say, you've got to get it down properly, it's just too much work. You're not going to do it. But if I can tell my developers that spend 2 minutes, just jot down the bullet points of what you did, then we've got the basis. And then the third time, okay, go back, let's add a bit more in. And the third time is that the signal. If the third time has come quite quickly, that's probably the signal that this is going to happen again and again. We might have to take more seriously. But it could be that actually the third time, the second time was a year ago. But still, take the opportunity to just document a little bit more. And so what I want to do is to create an environment where the team are incentivized to keep pushing in the right direction, but not make a kind of perfectionist environment where it just becomes too much like hard work. And so we'd rather duck it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've had my own valleys, and I think that sort of idea of, are we on the right track and is this the right time to put the work in, is definitely one that resonates with me, because I had, I've been coaching for 3 years, but I didn't start out as coaching. I started out as doing fractional CTO, similar to what you were doing. And my first year was honestly too easy, because then I sort of hit a crunch and I realized I'm on mountain 1 territory, and end of year 1 was one of those moments where I was sort of it wasn't looking down a valley, I was looking down a cliff. It was a very scary moment. So year 2 was honestly a grind, but that was very much the case of, okay, there's a valley there. I didn't get a choice. I had to just jump and then start running up the other side of it, which is when I sort of pivoted from fractional to coaching. I would do it again every single time, but I will still remember the fear. I don't think my wife will ever let me forget either. But in terms of those moments of where we sort of think, oh goodness me, change has to happen to me now. Why is it that people so often underestimate the valleys? Because they rarely have that push that I had.
I think there's something here about the way, there's an optimism bias perhaps in us, which is difficult to break. And I think the answer to it is coaching, or shifting back, find the Sherpa who has done this route before. Find a mentor, find a coach, find someone experienced who you can learn from. That might be part of a community. I think the CTO craft community are a fantastic place if you're in the CTO space, which I guess most people listening will be in some form of technology. Find that network. I think in my early years, while I was working this journey, I was trying to do it alone. And I think that's was absolutely the wrong thing to do.
But such a common story.
So common. I've been working with a leadership coach for the last couple of years. A great guy called Simon, who works for Wayne. I wrote it down. Wakeman Wright. He's just changed the company name. It's been brilliant because just having he's not a technologist, but he's an experienced leader who can just help you think about some of these challenges, about what does it look like to drive change? Where are you trying to go? I mean, just somebody outside of you to actually ask you that question. So we talked about maps earlier on. Where exactly are you trying to get to? Just walk that back. Have you thought about the journey ahead of you? What's that going to mean? And I think there's just some walking alongside someone can help you plot out that, even if all you're doing is externally processing what's already inside you. But there's so much expertise out there. So I can't recommend getting external help enough. It's just really valuable.
I mean, obviously I'm biased, but that's amazing news to my ears, because one of those things I've heard often enough is that, there's AI now, AI can help me along. But one of the things, I mean, you made this mention about a comparison between a teenager and a Ferrari, which really resonated with me. So your view on AI is that it can just as easily accelerate you in effectively the wrong direction as much as it can accelerate you in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, AI, an enormous topic, so we won't go too far down the rabbit hole.
Just touching briefly on it, yeah.
But to me, and certainly kind of vibe coding, what I've had amazing experiences with, it feels a bit like putting rocket fuel into your car. And if you are an experienced driver, then that's an exhilarating ride. You are suddenly going faster than you ever thought was possible. And that's a big part of what I've been experiencing as I've kind of tried to run on ahead and get a feel for what this new generation of tools might mean. But I can also, I've crashed a car. I've tried personal projects, shot off, and AI has crashed it badly. And you're like, just forget that and wheel back. So yeah, it feels a lot like... you don't give your teenage son a high performance car, as soon as they've learned to drive, because they might do really well, but you're just asking for trouble, really. And that's definitely, it feels a bit of what's going on with AI at the moment. There's enormous potential there. But again, back to our maps, if we're not really clear about the outcomes you're looking for, and you don't build in, the common mistake I always make when I'm out walking an actual mountain is thinking I know where I'm going, putting the map away in my bag, and then getting to a certain point, getting the map out and going, oh, that's not the valley I thought I was in, or the ridges, or the pile of stones. And it's because we kind of arrogantly think we know where we're going without regularly checking in. And it's kind of, if you're out on real mountains, that could be the difference between life and death. And actually, for companies, for projects, it can similarly be fatal if we don't really be really clear. And if AI makes us faster, which I think there's lots of indications that it will, then we need to get really good at understanding our kind of our positioning systems and keeping track of ourselves and where we're at, where our team's at, but before they go shooting off in the wrong direction.
Yeah, definitely reminds me of the old story of the tailor, the summary of which is measure twice, cut once.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yes.
Talking about the map then, James, should we try and boil this down into a playbook that our listeners can take away with them? So I sort of got 5 steps in here, but jump in if you feel as though it needs expanding or explaining at any point. But step 1 I had as, assess the very first question they should ask in terms of where they are on the mountain, just as you were just explaining a moment ago.
Yeah. So
step 2 is...
Sorry, just on your map, I think you need to assess where you are, but also think about the right problem. So I think sometimes people will look at the whole landscape and they need to zoom straight in. So it might be that you have an amazing finance function in your company and it feels fantastic, but actually there's some elements of it which are not. So it is about kind of choosing your zoom and then being really specific, because if you pick too big a canvas, you'll struggle.
Cool. Okay. So get specific enough so you know exactly which problem you're trying to solve, and then be honest with yourself about where you actually are right now.
Yeah, that's got it.
Cool. And if we assume we're on mountain 1, we're probably not going to go too far wrong there. Step 2 then is be honest with yourself whether you're on mountain 1, mountain 2, or whether you're pretending you're actually on mountain 3.
I've never found anyone on mountain 3. So do let me know if you find yourself, you're already there. I mean, of course, we are for lots of things, but we tend to not care too much about the stuff that is already super excelling. We live in the world of problems. So honesty around that and asking yourself those honest truths around how consistently am I able to achieve these outcomes? If you swapped me out of the equation and put someone else in, how quickly could they pick those things up? How resilient is my organization or this process? to unexpected change? All of those questions help you figure out where you're at. And you may find lots of what you do is mountain 2, but actually when you factor in some unexpected external risks, it makes you refocus and perhaps you put yourself back onto 1 again while you go deeper and try to process, resilience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So step 3 then I had was coming back to this analogy of the valley, was be clear about which valley you need to go down in order to get to mountain 2. Because I think, as you said before, if you're not going in the right direction, you go down the wrong valley and you suddenly think, signposts aren't what I thought they were.
Yep. The pain of the valleys.
And I think step 4 is very closely related to that, is, prepare the team. Because it's not just you walking down that valley, you're leading, and therefore by definition, you're taking a whole bunch of other people down that valley and up the other side of it as well.
Yeah. Do the team or do your clients trust you? And are you going to be there for them when the valley is harder than you thought?
And I suppose that works on several levels. Are you going to be there physically? Are you an interim or a fractional whereby you may not be there when the next mountain is reached? And the other one is, are you actually present and helping people along rather than absently pointing away to the next mountain?
Yes. Yeah. Shouting from the top of your mountain or from your helicopter hovering over the mountains. And that's a new angle to it.
Absolutely. And then step 5, be realistic, because by the time you get to mountain 2 may not be actually mountain 2 by the time you reach there if you take too long to make that climb. You could be back on mountain 1 before you know it.
Yes. Expect this to be something like one of those conveyor belts that you're trying to go up again backwards or something. When you get to the destination, it is probably not going to be a final destination for you. It will probably be the next milestone on a longer journey.
Awesome. And as a playbook, I think it's relatively straightforward and simple for anybody to take, apply, and get a lot of mileage out of. But a question for fun for you, because I can see how you can apply this 3 mountains model to almost anything. But have you ever managed to stretch it to the point where it actually breaks and you think, okay, we're on the wrong analogy here?
I think we've tried to kind of map out that future generation. So you may well have had projects where you've broken it down into a number of steps, each of which with a milestone. And then we can almost think of each of those as a mountain. So we're going to do project A will get us to mountain 2, project 2B will get us to mountain 3, then there'll be a mountain 4 and a 5 and a 6. So we've tried that. I've wheeled it back to really 3 mountains, although arguably it's really 2 with 1 in the mist is kind of up where I'm landing. All of these metaphors, you can stretch them too far; they snap, and this one will definitely break if you prod it hard enough. But I've had good mileage from it over the years so far.
Absolutely amazing, James. It's been a fascinating conversation. If people want to continue the conversation with you after this, where can they reach you?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest place. I think you'll post the link out. Find me on LinkedIn, and if you're looking for a membership CRM, which is probably a pretty niche kind of overlap with our listeners, then do check out sheepcrm.co.uk, where we're selling.
Apparently excellent for all of those things you do in your spare time that need a membership.
Well, you can try.
James, it's been wonderful to have you. Thank you very much. And one last thing, one which I love asking all my guests, which is if you were to come up to a CTO just stepping into the role right now, if you gave them one tip to make their life significantly easier, what would it be?
I think I'll go back to my coaching, my mentoring, or my Sherpa advice, which is, find someone to walk this journey with you.
A strong piece of advice. James, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate your time. So just before you go, I'd like to ask you for a favor in return for putting together this episode of the CTO Playbook for you. Please share the episode with just one person who will appreciate it. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or another platform, sharing the episode will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great content. Remember that you can find more information on the CTOplaybook.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.